It is our great privilege and a great honour for this gathering to have with us the 9th President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins. The President is a politician, obviously, but more particularly he is also a background as a writer, broadcaster and poet. He has been a champion of creativity in Ireland, inaugurated into the role of President of Ireland on the 11th of November 2011. The President has shown a strong interest and commitment to solidarity with the Irish abroad and has visited many of the Irish centres around the world. He has had close links, obviously, with the United States and with Mexico, and we're particularly pleased to have the Mayor of Guadalajara here with us. And the President has visited Guadalajara in the past. So it is my great honour and privilege to invite President Higgins to address us today. President Higgins.
If I may commence in our own language, Ordweir in Idalig, we're in a Kundehes na Kahara Esulia, ni one in Erin, Shifsha Taka Halar, Tofirkin Folcheroev, August Kamala Shin to a Heilshi. Anna de Mexico in a day in the Stotianta Elohe, August to Ohasarm Gwil Shidlin. The Hogshe Sosaviliatum, Glockolish Kirill Yartlip. May I say straight away, Lord Mayor in Nidalig, mayors and deputy mayors, dear friends, and particularly I understand their excellencies, the Ambassador of Mexico and the Ambassador of the United States, and other distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it is a great pleasure to have been able to accept the invitation to speak at this important conference with its two great words, independence and interdependence. I am very pleased to have been asked to participate and to speak at your important summit, inviting us as it does to reflect on the fundamental interdependence that binds us all together, all of us who dwell on this fragile planet and who must take each other into account. I must say a special welcome, of course, to the Alcalde de Guadalajara. I was in my 20s when I visited Guadalajara for the first time, and I was very pleased to be able to speak in Guadalajara as president. Bienvenida a esta tierra. Me gusta mucho que usted esté aquí. This unique gathering of citizens, diplomats and mayors is connected through a very important network, the Sister Cities Network. And so as I extend that warm welcome to all of you here who have travelled from afar, as I've said from many parts of Ireland and from North America, I think as well I have saluted the Mayor of Guadalajara. May I also salute the Deputy Mayor of San Jose, California, which I also visited quite recently. And I had the privilege to visit as President of Ireland. This is the 30th anniversary of the San Jose-Dublin Sister City agreement. And that is a very important symbol of the vibrant friendship that unites our two nations, our two peoples, our two cities. I also salute the Mayor of Liverpool, that wonderful city that has such deep links to Ireland in all sorts of circumstances, in the last century, the previous century before that, and today, in which I had an opportunity of visiting, which is a wonderful Irish Studies program in its university. Well, I have spent much of my time over the recent weeks, as you will appreciate, on the subject of independence and the importance of the achievement of freedom, on the different strategies that were involved in the Irish case. The second word in your conference theme, interdependence, is what I want to speak about just this morning. I think on the subject of independence and the achievement of freedom, one can make a long contemplation, but in modern circumstances, it is the recognition of our global interdependence and its consequences, both the bad practices and the possibilities. For we have exchanged bad practices, and of course there are very, very many, what we would say in the ancient Irish language, féidirachtaí gan teorann atá an fós, infinite possibilities for cooperation that remain with us for achievement. I think at the present time we're given a great challenge at this moment in the 21st century. And the challenges facing us is that at times we appear to succumb to passivity, to be passive consumers of experience rather than active citizens that are seeking to change and bring the world we wish into existence. Sometimes, even on the accounts of this in the world of communications, what are presented to us are bogus inevitabilities that stand in the way of our thinking creatively, investigating new strategies, or, as I have said, stretching ourselves and our peoples towards new possibilities of mind and heart. In Europe, at the moment, the question of our solidarity with the wider world is being raised in a most pressing manner by the unfolding refugee crisis, a crisis that isn't regional, but that calls for responsibility at the level of the international community. We must think of our planet as a planet upon which people move, sometimes voluntarily, unfortunately recently and lately increasingly involuntarily. We have 6 million displaced people on our planet at the present time, for which we have a global responsibility. So we can choose to acknowledge that that unprecedented wave of displacement, forced migrations, about which we would know a great deal in Ireland because of our experience. So many of you from North America. I often remember reading, when I was preparing speeches that I gave in the United States, reading an article in the London Times at the end of the 19th century about the great wave of post-famine migrations that went to the United States. And the London Times that had been hostile to intervention suggestions in relation to the Irish famine of 1847-49, suddenly 25 years later says, they have gone to a country that will be one of the greatest countries in the world, and they will never let us forget. And thus, Irish America was of crucial importance in relation to sustaining the movement towards independence in Ireland. But today, all of us, in all nations, in all parts of our fragile planet, have to take up this second comment. We cannot face issues of climate change, sustainable development, global poverty, responding to movements, unless we do so recognizing our interdependence. I think, therefore, we have to move beyond passivity. I think what we need to do is that we can choose to acknowledge that the unprecedented wave of displacement and forced migrations we face at present is likely to grow exponentially. In population terms on our world, 50% of the increase in population between 18 and 25 will take place on the continent of Africa. It will take place in 8 countries in the world, 6 of whom are in sub-Saharan Africa. Approximately 1.2 billion males, 1.2 people will either be in sustainable environments or begin moving to cities. I think that over the coming decades, should no radical and concerted response be provided at global, regional, and local level to the immense challenge posed by climate change as a crucial part of a new approach to sustainable development, we may be forced to bear the consequences in a reactive and unpredictable way that would be very dislocating to peace itself. So I very much welcome, therefore, the opportunity you gave me by inviting me to join with you in discussing the inescapable necessity of uniting our efforts in the fight against global climate change, and to do so in a very practical way through actions implemented at the level of our cities, the ordinary actions piled upon each other that have extraordinary consequences. And the timing of this summit is, of course, so fitting. Both here in Ireland and in the United States, this year is one of important commemorations and celebrations of new beginnings, or of what we might call new departures. The 100th anniversary of Ireland's Easter Rising of 1916, the 240th anniversary of the American Declaration of Independence, and this day is furthermore of global significance because the signing ceremony on the Paris Agreements on climate change is taking place at United Nations headquarters in New York. So all these various anniversaries and all of these things that are occurring together can be for us a powerful reminder of our new circumstances and of the global dimension that citizenship entails today. As we cherish and enjoy today the rights of citizenship, won for and bequeathed to us by our national independence, we have to realize how the fundamental objective of social cohesion, achieved in conditions of sustainability, cannot be achieved merely behind national borders. We are making our decisions in a context where so many of the structures of our contemporary condition, from climate to telecommunications and migration, they all point to the need for a fundamental solidarity between all societies across the globe. In July of last year, I had the pleasure of accepting the invitation of President Hollande to speak at one of the preliminary consultations held in the run-up to the Paris COP21 on climate change. At that preliminary conference, entitled Consciences for Climate, much of the discussion revolved around the ethical and intergenerational nature of the challenge of climate change and the revolution in consciousness it calls forth, the need for a new departure rooted in a reconciliation between ethics, economics, and ecology. And that emerged as an essential dimension that we all agreed must be an adequate response to climate change. Now, achieving that is both a scholarly and a practical challenge because it calls for a new discourse at one level that is adequate, transparent, public, and shared, and it must garner the support of citizens. And for all of us, there are the questions that were there in Paris. The questions were unequivocal. Yes, the scientific reality of climate change is now accepted. But are we genuinely ready to depart from economic models that encourage trade-offs in favor of the present to the detriment of the future? Are we able in our individual lives, as well as in our collective political choices, to care for a world we shall not see, the world of which we are but the custodians for the generations of tomorrow? Can our generation effectively seize the problems we have inherited and respond to them creatively for those future generations? What must we do to turn words into achievements? These are the questions that frankly constitute our moral challenge in contemporary terms. For a part of the response to those questions must involve all of us here, we will agree, planning in and for our cities and our urban areas. As the mayor of Rio, Eduardo Paes, put it, people live in cities, not states or nations. And that bold statement reflects the unprecedented scale of urbanization in our contemporary world. While only 50 years ago, just 1/3 of the world's population lived in cities, the balance has shifted dramatically over the last decade. This was reflected here in Ireland, where the population of the greater Dublin area has actually doubled over the last half-century. According to the United Nations, the turning point globally was reached in 2007, when the threshold of 50% of the world's population living in urban areas was crossed. This proportion is predicted to rise to over 65% by the middle of this century, meaning that an additional 2.5 billion people will be city dwellers. While such cities produce 75% of the world's gross domestic product, they are also, unfortunately, responsible for 75% of our global carbon emissions. As the world continues to urbanize, therefore, and as cities continue to grow into megacities, it is clear that much of the drive towards any mitigation of climate change must come from urban spaces, must come from cities. Now, before I suggest, and I assure you with some modesty, how cities that are a main source of climate change can be and have started to be part of the solution, may I briefly recall for you the scale of the challenge posed by climate change to human life itself on our planet. The devastating effects of global warming in terms of environmental degradation, desertification, temperature increases, droughts, the rise of sea levels, the multiplication of spells of extreme weather are now widely acknowledged and accepted by contemporary science. Even more importantly, they are fast becoming a reality experienced on a daily basis, although with differentiated acuity by all of the inhabitants of the globe. And that has helped public awareness of the problem we face. Should the current path of global warming remain unchanged, the prospects for human life are so dreadful that to evoke them would be to describe the nightmares of mass hunger, massive population displacement, increased violence and conflict. An unchecked climate change, in other words, not only makes social cohesion into an impossible dream, it would erode the very foundation of our societies. The urgency of the problem was recognized, of course, by our world leaders when they met in Paris for COP21 in December 2015, and today they signed the agreements. As you know, the ambitious overall objective of the Paris Agreement is to hold the global average temperature below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, with an ambition of keeping the rise below 1.5. But if this is to be implemented through a series of measures taken not only at national but at local level. Ireland is currently endeavouring to meet its European Union target, calling for a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 20% below 1990 levels by the year 2020. I know that our friends in San Jose are doing likewise through their own greenhouse gas reduction strategy. This is a subject I had the pleasure of discussing with the Mayor of San Jose, Sam Liccardo, and Governor of California, Jerry Brown, during my visit to the American West Coast in the autumn of last year. And I expect, following those conversations, that we can learn so much from sharing our respective plans and measures and our responses to what are shared challenges. The struggle against climate change, of course, did not begin or emerge in Paris. The effect of greenhouse gases on our environment have been examined since the late 1800s. But by the 1980s, the need for action had become so urgent. Although we've known for several decades that the causes of climate change are primarily human in origin, having come about in particular through industrialization and the exploitation of fossil fuels, there has been for far too long an obdurate refusal to accept the conclusions of good science and change policy or lifestyles in accordance with that good science. Indeed, a well-funded campaign, underpinned by the lobbying of powerful vested interest, was launched against such science in an attempt to negate the reality of global warming. While inaction prevailed, emissions soared with life-altering implications for many parts of the world. Those least responsible for the effects have been paying the immediate and highest price. The Paris conference may have been a turning point then, in that it built a consensus around the need for concerted action at international level, a consensus that was grounded in the triumph of genuine science over political lassitude and the power of a responsible but well-funded activity by an unaccountable section of the international corporate world that sought to continue existing practices. Importantly, it also recognized that the implementation of globally agreed targets must involve local action, thus giving cities a central role in achieving our agreed global climate change aspirations. City leaders took center stage at the Paris conference, with the C40 cities climate leadership group making significant pledges to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. This C40 group, together with a compact of mayors, which I know included Mayor Liccardo, announced 400 commitments aimed at achieving over half of the global greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2020. This is a compelling illustration of the ability, above all the willingness and the consciousness of our cities to tackle climate change. It is also a superb example of how relatively small-scale commitments can, when embraced collectively, yield very significant results. Indeed, some of the largest cities in the world have peaked or will soon peak their emissions, and many are already reducing their carbon footprint. The recognition of the crucial role of cities in tackling climate change extends, however, well beyond the Paris Agreement and its associated targets for the limitation of greenhouse gases. Cities are not just the heart and centre of global economic activity. They are also key sources and wellsprings of social and political change. Any reflection on the role of cities in this new century must therefore look beyond regulations and action plans implemented by urban authorities, however good. It must go further to comprise an examination of lifestyles and political decisions that concern all of our citizens. Indeed, any adequate strategy for tackling climate change at city level is one that should, I believe, be predicated upon the needs of citizens, and in particular the most vulnerable among them. We should aspire to an urban civilization and culture of sufficiency as an alternative to contemporary exhortations to insatiable consumption without care of consequences. Compact, connected, coordinated cities are not just more productive economically, they're also more socially inclusive, resilient, healthy. Well-planned cities are cities with enough green public spaces, thus providing essential opportunities to reduce emissions, noise and pollution, while at the same time improving the welfare and recreational life of their cities. As we attempt to create cities that are responsible to both their natural environment and their citizens, the crucial decisions to be taken in the coming decades include then such crucial sectors as transport infrastructure, construction and industry, as well as attention to the natural texture of our urban environment, its trees, its gardens, its public parks, and its water. This multi-dimensional quality of cities is one that was harnessed in another milestone summit convened last September in New York to define our new international agenda for sustainable development. This new agenda for sustainable development recognizes cities as key areas through which to link in new ways multiple development goals. Due to their density, urban areas are indeed very appropriate places to identify novel systematic linkages between economy, energy, environment, and social outcomes. Goal number 11, that the world leaders have agreed to, states, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Sustainable, reliable, and adequate public urban transport offers a very good illustration of this. It simultaneously facilitates the reduction of air pollution and by association assists in achieving positive health outcomes, as well as sustainable economic activity through the efficient movement of workers and increased social interactions through the city. It offers a more flourishing, healthy social life. Effective public transport systems also, of course, for more compact cities. They create more compact city possibilities, thereby limiting the consumption of agricultural land, while imaginative urban design and the provision of green space can enrich both urban diversity and human well-being. When I went to the United States at the age of 25, what I studied in the Midwest was the history of the American city. And I am so convinced that the future of the city will define the future of civilization as I've been describing it. But with this in mind, may I point to another crucial dimension of contemporary urban development. While megacities, that is, urban areas with more than 10 million inhabitants, are, as I've already said, due to increase in number, recent scholarship has shown that most urban residents live in smaller secondary cities, and that it is in those smaller cities that most of the population growth is set to happen in the coming decades. The implication of this is of tremendous importance. It means that much city building is yet to take place. Given the long lifespan of many pieces of urban infrastructure, we are presented with a historic opportunity to integrate the objective of sustainable development into the very base planning of so many cities that are only being born in so many regions of the world, and in particular the poorer areas of the world. These poorer cities and poorer regions, despite all their difficulties, have an advantage in that their shape being still relatively fluid. They can, with adequate political will and financial support, but also with imaginative use of resources, avoid the mistakes made in cities that developed in an earlier period. A new sustainable urban form, drawing from an imaginative public architecture, science, technology, and a publicly grounded ethic about the importance of the public space and the public world, can come into being. But any new urban form, however, has also to take the transience of migratory behaviour into account. The city dwellers of the future may not be sedentary occupants of fixed space and time as we have known it in the past. Indeed, our cities, as incubators of ideas and talents, are so well placed to learn from one another, to exchange technology, ideas and solutions so as to better tackle the global challenge of climate change. That is why, Deputy Mayor Herrera, the agreement between Dublin and San Jose is of such great value. We need to nurture and expand the space of this dialogue. The initiatives being undertaken by San Jose in, for example, reducing car travel, promoting walking and cycling, and using renewable energy are echoed here in Dublin and in other cities across the globe. However, bespoke local initiatives such as Dublin Bikes or segregated cycle lanes can, I believe, pave the way for wider application across cities and continents. I was very impressed during my visit to the Tesla factory and my visit to California last year to witness the potential of such technological innovations as electric cars that can positively transform our ways of living in the city while reducing our footprint in terms of emissions. New technologies, then, they can be harnessed with so much benefit by municipal administrators to achieve unprecedented levels of efficiency, security, welfare, sustainability in our cities. However, we must be wary not to let the vision of the smart city generate the same abstractions, mistakes and misunderstanding that doomed the high modernist urban planning of the 20th century. Above all, we must ensure that our smart cities are ones that actually offer solutions that improve the livelihoods of citizens, and that they are no mere rhetorical cover for the commercial strategies of technology companies. In a report entitled Science, Technology, Innovation for Sustainable Urbanization, published in February 2015, the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, UNCTAD, have argued that a mix of innovative technology, appropriate technology, and regulation can indeed help cities become more sustainable. Yet UNCTAD also warned that such efforts will fail if they sideline residents and become hijacked by private interests or technology companies. That report showed, too, that innovative technologies that challenge the status quo, such as, for example, renewable energy options and technologies, are always at risk of being blocked by powerful interests, and in particular those tied to the exploitation of fossil fuels. I don't need to tell you of the scale of the funding available to such people who seek to block science. An awareness of these wider power issues must also complement, I believe, the search for innovative technological and scientific solutions in the service of more sustainable city life. Equally importantly, we should never forget that it is the poorer inhabitants of the world's poorer cities who are most vulnerable to the effects of global climate change. 1 billion people worldwide live in slums, and according to United Nations Habitat, this figure is likely to double over the forthcoming decade, 10 years, to reach 2 billion by 2030. Those people who live on the edge, physically, economically, and politically, in coastal cities, on riverbanks, as I saw them in Colombia, in Portaventura, in Buenaventura, in hazard-prone areas, without rights to their land, with little savings, without proper right of access in their city. Those are the people who are on the front lines of climate change. Financial solidarity with those poorer cities must be an essential component of any ambitious international response to climate change. And the Paris Agreement provides important advances, promises at least, in that regard. Yet it would be highly presumptuous to view this as a one-sided process. The world's poorer cities can tell us much, and they must be enabled to follow their own path of development, and we can learn from them. Importantly, the inhabitants of Western cities have so much to learn from the extraordinary creativity deployed by the people of the shanty towns, for example, of India and Egypt, of Peru's pueblos jóvenes, or of Brazil's favelas. When reflecting on our own lifestyles, we should not overlook the possibilities entailed in all those survival strategies based on the recycling of waste and construction material, the growing of food and urban interstices, the sharing of the means of transport. Smart cities are not just about science and new technologies. They're about people and livelihoods. Finally, while this might strike a slightly dissonant note in today's discussions, may I remark how, in my view, any reflection on the role of cities in curbing global climate change should be mirrored and complemented by an equally important effort at thinking about the future of our rural areas, our villages and our fields, our mountains and our islands. The devastating process of rural immigration and depopulation in so many regions of the world should not be any blind spot in our discussion. Indeed, it is my profound conviction that agricultural development and subsistence farming are and will continue to be an essential component of any adequate response to global climate change. I repeat again my aim of creating a civilization of sufficiency as opposed to an unthinking culture of insatiable consumption. Going back then to the title of today's summit, may I conclude my remarks by saying, quite simply, that no contemporary challenge more clearly reveals our fundamental interdependence in the shadow of each other as human beings, sharing the same vulnerable planet as does global climate change. We are invited, given the possibilities in this new century, to unite forces, exchange ideas, make technologies compliant with ecological necessities, to act in concert from all of our different cities in order to respond adequately to this greatest of challenges, while respecting the right of every city to follow its own distinctive path of development according to its unique social, environmental, and cultural composition. And there will be many new languages which we didn't know and which we must protect, like our own. Allow me to finish in my own. Marjan Tommy Tarishchak Lekela, Honor Gathaka, Agus Honor Dire Isulia, Leshan Tishkan Gwilimid Ilya Marvil, the Ein Clan Wong. Agus can Adawal Gwilshimar Fragric, I Gutshinakin, Ara Hur, Tor Blaned, A Cohin with Ilyok. Ligduin Lekela Bartha Yanav, der in a Tishkin Shintrid, Tiok der Schlitcher Maraktola, in our Gathaka, Ato Wahas Marklan down there. Gohetikul, Gahaklemulagas Hekoliata. This morning here in Croke Park, we have come together from all our different cities and countries, anxious to acknowledge that we are one in our common humanity, that we acknowledge our common responsibility for the fragile planet that nurtures us. Let us together then turn the awareness and commitment into reality by making our cities the site of a historic and transformative reconciliation between economic, ethics, and ecology. Muchas gracias. Thank you.